We're going to go ahead and jump into how to write the essay. And the first essay we are going to break down is the word analysis essay. And the word analysis essay is basically the decoding essay. Can this child read the words? And if we think about our spectrum, we're looking at K through second and of third-ish. I have seen essay prompts go all the way from second to fourth, but most of them lie within third grade, with the reasoning that at the third grade mark, they should be already passing that phase of decoding, because we're going from learn to read to learn. And actually, phonemic awareness and concepts of print would not qualify, because this is more for like really young children, and phonemic awareness is just sound. So we're gonna only focus on these categories right here. So you're gonna see that in the other videos that you've watched, I have like a coding system on the side. So I want you to think about that same coding system, but let's just clarify it. So first we have letter to sounds correspondence. We have onset, oh, that was a weird O, onset and rhyme, rules, multi-syllable words, and sight words. And then I add another one in there because this one is super important, and it's BL. And BL counts for consonant blends and vowel blends, okay? This might look a little complicated, but when we have it in action, it won't be. So I wanna go ahead and jump in right away. So this right here is a little piece of a running record. In the previous video, we talked about this is a method of assessment. In our school, we call them as step testing, but nonetheless, a lot of reading inventory tests do this, where they have the child read and the teachers on the other side, like check marking or putting codes down for each word that they read. I will be attaching a video of how to perform these running records if you've never seen it happen, but if you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? In our school specifically, we do not fill in this area here, which is unfortunate because I later learned it could have really helped in identifying some word issues here as they read, okay? Just to tell you, when you get this on the test, you're either gonna get 1 or 2 lines, or you may get a full one like this. For this purposes, I'm putting a full one. And the parts that you wanna concentrate, you wanna concentrate on this up here. And also they will have another like key as to what all these markings mean. This one specifically did not have a key, but check mark would be that they said it correctly. On top is the word that they said. If it's SC, it's a self-correct. If it's an R, they repeated that, and with the sound that they repeated it. A little thing in here like this is called an insertion. And I'm thinking that this one here, these brackets, are called an exclusion. So like they omit information. That's also an error. So here's an error. And the way you evaluate this is you count every line, how many error and self-corrects. So here was a self-correct. And with this additional codification here, the self-correct, was it based in meaning, structure, or visual? This was based in a structural thing. They didn't say off, they said of, because they said they saw the OF. That's a decoding issue, right? While visual here, this error into, they didn't see it. There was something that the teacher saw the child doing while they're reading that they have determined that it's a visual thing. All right, so now that you know your way around this, on one side of your whiteboard or your scrap paper, I had a whiteboard, some people have scrap paper, you're gonna write W1, weakness 1, W2. So the prompt usually asks you to find 2 weaknesses. I always like finding 3, but let's stick to the basic 2 weaknesses and 2 strengths. Strength 1 and strength 2. If you're wondering where I got this method from, that professor that I usually put his videos up, he's the distant learning professor. He actually has videos. Now he has a little bit of foundation videos, but when I took my test, he had videos to help reading specialists pass their test. And reading specialists actually have 5 essays they need to write. 2 of those are the same essays we need to write. So I saw how he was teaching that and broke it down and this coding on the side. And I said, that's a wonderful idea, and it definitely worked for me. It also helped me organize my thoughts. So on one side, you're looking for weakness 1, weakness 2, strength 1, strength 2. And now we're going to put the codes that it's necessary for you to memorize. But if you know the spectrum, it's going to be easy for you. So think about the easiest skill inside phonics. We have letter to sound correspondence. Then beginning and ends, which is onset and rhyme. Then remember, we had the blends. And the blends were either consonant-based, so the diphthongs and the digraphs, and I don't want you to worry too much about those words, but consonant blends with the PH and the SPs and the BRs and the SPTs and all these consonant blends that you blend together to make one sound. It's very important for a child to identify. And the other ones were the vowel teams, right? The EEs and the OOs and the AEs, knowing what to do. Those are called vowel blends. So we have letter to sound correspondence, onset and rhyme, blends, big one, rules. And we have 3 major rules. We have the E rule, the R rule, and the IR rule, which is irregular words. These additional little things in here, you don't have to put them, but just for this conversation, I'm going to later erase them because you need to rely more on your knowledge of these notes rather than so much of the notes, right? The notes are there as reminders. So letter sound correspondence, onset and rhyme, blends in consonant and vowels, the rules of the ER and irregular rules. Then we have multisyllabic words, and inside multisyllabic words, we not only have symbols, but you can also count them as compound words. And then sight words and low-level vocabulary, words they just need to know. So these are the errors or strengths that I'm looking for. Because if my child could identify letters to sound, onset and rhyme, blends in consonant and vowels, all the rules, multisyllabic words, and sight words, they are ready to move on to full comprehension. This child knows how to read, right? All right, so as promised, I'm gonna go ahead and erase these little things here because ideally you want it to look like this, nice and simple and reminders. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and dig in. Usually what I like to do is I like to start with sight words because sight words is a nice, easy one that we can always identify. So here's a sight word, the, it, it, and, got it. All over the place, this child can identify sight words. So I'm actually going to put that as a strength. Let's look at another strength. Letter sound correspondence. Looks like they know letter sound correspondence really good. So I'm going to look for onset and rhyme, blends, or rules. All right, let's go to the next word. Wheel. Well, right here, the child was able to do the WH. That's a blend inside of a consonant. And EE. That's another vowel blend. That's 2 pieces of evidence that they're really good at that. Of, off. All right, they did something tricky there. I'll come back and check for it. Comes. Comes can also count as a low-level vocabulary. Truck. TR, CK, another consonant blend up there. Let's go down here. The EE, we already determined they know how to say that. IE, another consonant blend. This kid is, not consonant blend, vowel team. This kid is really good at vowel teams, I see so far. EE, these words he didn't say, and we'll go back to this, but look at this irregular, throw. He did the TH and identified that irregular word. So I'm gonna give that 1 for the rule, right? So here he made an error with the F and the B, but he was able to say that rule, the R rule. That's another R rule right there. Faster, right here, boom, faster. That's another consonant blend. So like right now, I'm gonna put strength for consonant blend. So consonant blend. And because it's really good to sometimes have an extra one, there's an extra strength here that's emerging. And the extra strength are inside the rule. This R rule, the R rule, hear it again, irregular word rule. Water, yeah, you said river wrong, but you said water, that ER rule, perfect. AR, perfect. Into the school, here's another vowel blend, faster. So I feel like this kid really does well, look over with the rules, especially the R rule. All right. So I've actually identified 3 strengths. You're only asked 2, but it's okay to be extra. And the reason why it's okay to be extra, because sight word is kind of a low level thing, like duh. What type of 3rd grader is not going to know sight words? And if they don't know sight words, we really have a big problem, because these are words they're learning in kindergarten, like flashcards, excuse me, the in, right? So I can do 1 or 2 things. I can completely eliminate sight words because it's such a low level thing, but I could also include it so that they can see that I know what I'm talking about and what I'm looking for. And remember, you have to cite examples, and we're going to see how that comes together. You can also quickly write the example, but you actually just need this right here as a guide. Let's look at some weaknesses. And so what we do with the weaknesses is we go to the errors that they made. So let's look at this error. They said through the town, then repeated again through the town. Well, when a child does any repeat or self-correct, that's called metacognition. There's something going on in their brain that tells them they didn't say something correctly. Another type of metacognition is, and this happens to me a lot, is if I'm reading really fast, I'll anticipate the word that belongs in there, and it might not be the right word, but it makes sense. And I feel like this is what this child did in 2 major occasions. Look at this sentence right here. The wheel rolls through the field. The child first said, the wheel went through the field. The wheel goes through the field. So what this child did was a type of metacognition of just anticipating the word. He never read the word correctly at all. So even though metacognition, thinking about the thinking, can be a strength, in this sense, he's anticipating words. And again, it happens here, and again, it happens here. This is a stronger example of when it's happening. The water rolls towards the water or river. He was supposed to say river, but he said water. They both make sense. It doesn't take away from the meaning, but nonetheless, it's wrong. So this is another way of that child anticipating what's going to be there, putting a word that makes sense instead of actually reading. And there's another little situation where that's happening with this of. It's supposed to say it rolls out the door, but it made more sense in his brain as he was reading to say it rolls out of the door, right? That happens to me a lot while I insert another word because, again, I'm anticipating that type of metacognition. So I'm going to put as weakness this metacognition of anticipating words and therefore not properly identifying the word. So metacognition, not ID the word correctly, right? They're putting in another word that doesn't change the meaning of the sentence, but it's still not reading. The other weakness that I'm looking at are things with onset and rhyme. And onset and rhyme is the beginning. Here with the of, they self-corrected, then they said off. Something was going on with that end that they couldn't pronounce correctly. Farm, that onset right there was chopped off. Towards, they added a Z. That end part was chopped off. In, and then they said into. That end part was chopped off. So do you see that there are issues with onset and rhyme? So I'm gonna say onset and rhyme. Overall, I see a child that can read pretty well. They can decode pretty well, but I think we're having a little issue right now with speed, like the rate in which they're reading and just focusing and tracking every single word. So I'm gonna go ahead and put as the overall issue that is probably guiding these weaknesses is tracking. And so my feedback or intervention with this child, they would pass to the next level. But my intervention with this child is focusing more on physical tracking, right? Whether it's using your finger to track or using a tool to track. But this is like fast reading where the kid is replacing words and dropping off ends and dropping off beginnings just to move on. But in general, they're reading. All right, so we have weakness 1, we have metacognition of not properly identifying words. And then we have weakness 2 of onset and rhymes. There are other examples where you will see that maybe their weakness is not knowing how to say the AR rule. That's where you would put the coding up here, right? The point is that this is based on all your strengths and weaknesses are going to be based on your LS, OR, blends, rules, MS, and W. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So number 1, it's important to use the technology. I can't insist more on this. In order for you to really show you know what you're talking about, you need to use that terminology. You need to use words such as decoding, onset and rhyme, letter sound correspondence, beginning sound, end sound. If you want to push it, you can say and digraphs, but you can also say consonant blends, vowel teams. You need to use these. You can't just say, oh, he didn't know how to read the double E. No. Okay, the double E, thank you. But what is that called when there's a 2 E's or 2 O's or an A and an E? That's a vowel blend. You really need to use the terminology, multisyllabic words. It just gives richness to the essay, right? So I'm gonna put a caveat in there with this essay. I have a thing for properly structured essays, right? So I know that many people are like, oh, you just have to write 2 or 3 paragraphs. I wrote full 4 paragraphs because this is an essay, and an essay should have a beginning and an end, and then each paragraph for weakness and strength. I didn't just mush it together for 2 reasons. Number 1, I have a thing for really well-written essays, and also because these are professors, experts in reading and in writing that are going to be reading this, and you want to put the best foot forward, right? You want to make an impression, not only with your knowledge about the foundations of reading and decoding, but also that you know how to write a paragraph correctly, that you know how to structure these, because this writing represents you as an educator. And so for me, just writing really good, strong essays help me with my weaknesses. And my weaknesses is spelling, right? I have a weakness in spelling, or maybe, I don't know, I didn't identify something well, but I have a good structured essay. I know what I'm talking about to a certain extent. So let's jump into it. So in paragraph 1 is the intro. This is like a quick 3 to 4 sentences, right? You quickly name the weakness and how this is affecting fluency, because the coding is going to affect fluency. So if we quickly go back, we know that we would say something like, as this child, this child has several weaknesses and strengths. They have weaknesses in relying too much on metacognitive skills in order to read, but they have many strengths in decoding words with language rules and blends. This allows the student to read more fluently and therefore comprehend better. Something like that. That was 3 sentences of a quick, I named a little bit of something. Your second paragraph, you want the weaknesses. You always want to end with strengths, right? So identify the 2 to 3 weaknesses in word identification and decoding. Use the terminology for the weaknesses. Example, a student that has trouble reading past the onset cannot read multisyllabic words. So if they're reading a word and they can't get past that first word and the word has several symbols, say it. This child is having difficulty reading words, past the onset due to the multi-syllables in the word, right? Provide concrete examples. Here's my example. The student is unable to read multisyllabic words as demonstrated when she could not read words such as blah, 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 blah. If I go back to my little notes here, here's my weakness. This child shows that they rely too much on metacognition to identify words. This is evident when they read the word. When reading the word rolls, they replaced it with went and goes. Same situation when they said water instead of river. This showed that the student is relying heavily on anticipating what words should fit in there. It did not change the meaning of the sentence, but nonetheless, the child did not properly identify the word due to the reliance on metacognitive reading. Another weakness the student is showing is being able to either identify the onset or the rhyme of specific words. These examples are in the words off. The student identified OF to be of, then self-corrected when it didn't make sense, showing metacognition, but figured out that the rhyme had another F, making the word of. Another example where the student was unable to pronounce or did not pronounce the onset correctly was when they said farm instead of barn. You know, and actually farm and barn is another example of metacognition weakness, right? But I'm not going to say that. So here we go. The student replaced the B, the F for the B. Again, not focusing on that onset and identifying the word correctly. The last example that shows onset and rhyme is in where the child dropped the two, then goes back and reads it and figures out there's a multisyllable of into in there because it did not make sense. Okay, something like that. So basically you name the error, you give the example for the error. You name the error, you give the example for the error. Name the error, example for error. Always give 2 to 3 examples. That's why I tallied. Great. I have these many examples for onset and rhyme that are errors. These many examples where the child is relying too much on metacognition and anticipating words and not reading words correctly. I tallied them because if I have several examples, I have my clear justification. Paragraph 3, we're talking about strengths. Same exact idea, same structure. Identify 2 to 3 strengths in word identification and decoding. Use the terminology. For example, a student is able to identify sight words and family root words. You provide concrete example. The student was able to read words like of and the, right? And how does this help the student's fluency? So let's go back and look at the strength. So it would go something like that. Even though the student has several weaknesses in identifying words, they have more strength that will help them towards fluency. The first thing is that the student is able to identify low-level vocabulary and sight words. He is able to repeatedly identify words like the, and, it, and also can read words such as rolls, cows, school, and wheel, which are considered to be low-level vocabulary words, right? That's a perfect example. So the next one would be consonant blend. One of the biggest strengths the student shows in his reading is identifying consonant blends and vowel teams. In a word such as wheel, the student was not only able to properly pronounce the WH, but also the WH blend, but also the EE sound, the vowel team EE. In the word faster, they were able to identify the ST as one sound. Same situation, same with field and through. This overall shows a strength in consonant blends and vowel teams. So then I'm going to go with the third strength. Another strength that seems to emerge, and you don't have to use all this fancy language, but this is how I speak. Another strength that seems to emerge in this running record is the student's abilities to decode the AR rule. This is evident in the word faster with the ER, river or water with the ER, the EE is a vowel blend or vowel team over ER. And so you give examples of every time you say it. So again, you are giving an example, you're giving what the strength is, an example, the strength, the example, the strength, the example, okay? The last part is the conclusion. And the reason why I throw in a conclusion in there is because the whole point of an assessment is to know if the child can move on or what you have to do to push them through. So you mentioned the strength. This child has many strengths in reading. Therefore, they have a high rate of reading and is able to read fluently. But they're relying too much on metacognition to anticipate words. An intervention that I would put in place for this child is to make sure they're tracking every single word so they identify every word instead of relying on metacognition to anticipate words. This will help with overall comprehension and will minimize error, right? I just said a whole paragraph right there. I know this seems a lot, but it really isn't, and it's important to have this proper structure, especially with giving the error, then giving the example, or giving the strength and the example within the text. So I'm going to put this up on the page. There's also an example of another one, not this specific one. I want you to look at it. And then if you click the button to write your essay, you could click the button to write your essay. Once you finish the essay, you are welcome to email me and say, can you please look at my essay? And I will give you feedback on this essay. So now I actually want to look at the before and after of an essay of a person who's actually has gone through this workshop with me and how they used to write it before and now after. So this example right here is somebody that has gone through this workshop with me, and we've been studying a lot. And hopefully by now they have the results and they have passed. But we're gonna see a change in essay writing. So before in the diagnostic test, this is what the person wrote, you know? And I'm gonna mark this up a little bit for you to see that there are parts of this that didn't make sense to me. It showed some type of knowledge of what's going on, but it really didn't help or didn't clearly show, or it didn't clearly show that she knew what she was talking about. All right. Daniel showed both strengths and weaknesses during oral reading performance. Okay, got it. That was smart. Proves his ability to identify sight words. Good. Sight words are words that cannot be sounded out, and they're just the words he read correctly was she, lay, on, now, the. That's a good one right there. And also define sight words. A weakness that Daniel showed during the oral reading performance was his analysis of word structure. Okay, so analysis of word structure. Daniel would pause before multisyllabic words. At first, Daniel would try to decode the prefix and the suffix. So right there, we're going to a place that, like, first of all, there was no words here with prefix and suffix. I think what should have been said is onset and rhyme. And pausing before reading multisyllabic words, well, they read like remember the kid was reading farm and barn, still had an error with onset and rhyme, but that's not a multisyllabic word. For example, the word homework, he stated Homer, remember. It is evident that Daniel showed both strengths and weaknesses in word identification and weaknesses in word structure and analysis. And then she gave an intervention of chunking. First of all, this only has one strength, one weakness. We're looking for 2 to 3 of them, right? And even just the general structure of this just doesn't look good. I'm sorry. If I was correcting this, and I'm not a reading expert, I'm not a professor that teaches this in the university. I just have a good knowledge base of this and can teach this, but I'm looking for like a good 2 paragraphs at least, right? 4 in my head, but 2 good worded paragraphs. After she had some instructions and we worked on it, this is what she ends up writing. The student exhibited both strengths and weaknesses in their running record. Perfect. We've identified this as a running record. One strength exhibits was their ability to recognize and correctly state sight words, tier 1 words. That's not only showing that she knows what sight words are, but what tier they're in. These words are the, it, over, she, and of. Great. Another strength this student shows was the metacognitive skills. And we did mention that metacognitive skills were strength and weakness, right? And this one she identified as a strength due to the self-correcting that he was doing. That's actually really good when the child does that. Recognize the word of and off, track and truck. Great. Those are really good ones. The scholar's strength in recognizing this mistake will enable the scholar to better comprehend this text. They read since they're able to identify and understand words actually written on the page. That's really good. Supports it, well structured, gives examples. And here she has two. Let's look at the weakness. A weakness which this student shows in the running record includes the student substituting words for other words. So that's another metacognition. I said anticipating words, she said substitution. That works perfectly well. Let's get the reasoning. Although these words make sense in the context, this shows the student is reading for meaning rather than accuracy. Absolutely. For example, the student reads farm instead of the word barn, river instead of water, went instead of rolls. In order to increase the student's accuracy, I would have the student using tracking fingers and ask themselves, does this make sense after each page? Absolutely. Like right there, there's the reasoning, the definition, why it's important. Another reason exhibited by the student is stating sentences that use alliteration. For example, the statement starts, through the town, the student went back and reread. I didn't even catch that. She caught that, right? Just reading these things that have repeated first sounds. I would have the student strengthen his skills by reading the sentence strips created with the use of that alliteration. So like, look at the before and look at the after. This essay right here, honestly, this essay right here, I don't know how they grade it. I can see the rubric, so just going for a whim. I'm gonna give this one a 1 because it had something, maybe a 2, because I mean, it showed something. But this is definitely a 3, if not more, right? This is really strong, and that's what you're aiming for. Good structure, paragraph structure, good wording, showing that you know, like using the terminology, using the reasoning, giving an intervention. This is super strong. I'm going to put all the resources on the page. Feel free to come back to this. I also put that outline as a single frame inside the site so that you can go back and refer to. Once more, you can click and write an essay, and I can give you direct feedback. Just send me an email.